Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 284. Major Bidwell. Major Bidwell was jailed in Victoria for 2 years for bigamy in 1911. This was not the last that Australia nor other countries around the world heard of him. He had the following aliases: Mervyn or Marvin Wolford Bidwell, Wolford Bidwell, Reginald Bidwell, MervynWollf Bidwell, and Major W.M. Bidwell. Major Bidwell was born at Bathurst, New South Wales on the 17th of June 1886 to Samuel Hope Wolford and Agnes Mary Bergen. His father was born in Middlesex, England. Samuel's grandson, John Burton, commonly known as Jack, of Wollongong, New South Wales, in 1984 gave an oral history to his niece-in-law, and he stated that Samuel's godmother was Lady Hope Scott, the granddaughter of Sir Walter Scott. In the memoirs of J.R. Hope Scott, that is James Robert Hope Scott of Abbotsford, it explains the association of the Wolford family with the Hope family, contributing to the naming of a son, Samuel Hope Wolford. A servant in his father's family, named Samuel Wolford, was incapacitated from work by a bad leg. Mr. Hope, that is General Sir Alexander Hope, the 2nd Earl of Hopetoun, a British Army officer, who became the last governor of the Royal Military College while it was at Great Marlow, became the Lieutenant Governor of Chelsea Hospital. Sir Alexander Hope himself dressed the poor fellow's sores and enabled him to improve himself so as to be advanced from his original position to that of confidential clerk, in which he long served his benefactor, and he was much valued by him. Samuel Wolford was retained by the Hope family after Sir Alexander's death in 1837. Samuel Wolford came to Victoria in January 1863 at the age of 17. In May 1867 he was working as a postmaster at Alexandria, Victoria, and his soon-to-be wife Agnes was a dressmaker living in Yea. He married Agnes at the Albion Hotel in Yea on the 24th of June 1867 when he was 22 and Agnes 27. Agnes was Irish and had arrived in Melbourne on the 21st of February 1860 on board the Prince of the Seas, and she was a housemaid. She travelled with her sister Catherine Bergen. Samuel stated on his marriage certificate that his father was a barrister. By 1869 they were living in Emerald Hill, Victoria, and Samuel added Bidwell as their surname. All of the children carry the name Bidwell. They then moved to Brawongle near Bathurst, New South Wales by 1874. They had 9 children in total, and Mervyn was the youngest. Samuel Bidwell died on the 8th of December 1898 at the age of 56, and Agnes died on the 18th of November 1897 at the age of 54. In the National Advocate of Bathurst on the 8th of December 1898 it announced the death of Samuel Bidwell. An old resident of the district and one universally liked and esteemed was Mr. Samuel Hope Bidwell, who died at Bathurst Hospital at 4 o'clock yesterday morning from dropsy. He'd been in the hospital for 3 weeks. He was 56 years of age and had resided in the district for 25 years, being successfully schoolmaster at Glenmire, Brawongle, Evans Plains and Dunkeld, the latter being his last home. His wife died about 12 months ago, and the grief at the loss of his loved helpmate seemed to intensify his malady, for he failed greatly since then. He leaves 4 sons. One is a schoolteacher near Sydney, 2 others are at Burke and Blaney respectively, and the youngest resides with his father. There are also 4 daughters, 2 of whom are married. Mr. Bidwell was one of the most popular and highly respected men in the district, and his demise will be widely and genuinely mourned. So Major Bidwell was 11 when his mother died and only 12 when his father died. On the 1st of July 1907, there is a mention in the New Zealand Auckland Star. Tragic death, fate of a well-known broker found shot in his office in Sydney. On the 25th of June 1907 in Sydney, there was announced the tragic death of a well-known broker who was found shot in his office. Mr. Felix Randall, the well-known stock and share broker and ex-chairman of the Sydney Stock Exchange, was found dying at his office in the Stock Exchange in Pitt Street early last evening. He was bleeding from a bullet wound to the head. Mr. Randall was a partner in the firm Randall and Willis, stock and share brokers, and at 25 minutes to 6 he went into his office on the first floor of the exchange, where he had been engaged practically all the afternoon. It was then close upon the hour at which he and the clerks usually locked up the office. The report of a firearm rang through the building almost immediately, and upon Mr. Major Bidwell, a clerk at the firm, rushed into the private room and saw his chief sitting in a chair leaning to the right with his head down. From a wound just above the right ear, blood was flowing, while a revolver lay at his feet. On the 28th of October 1908 in the Government Gazette of New South Wales, notice is hereby given that the partnership, which for some time past existed between Major Bidwell, Sidney Gurner and William Brookman, under the firm of Bidwell, Gurner and Brookman of Pitt Street, Sydney, stock, station, property and general commission agents, has been dissolved by mutual consent. On the 24th of March 1909 in the Sydney Morning Herald, it was announced that Major Bidwell had married. On the 27th of January at St Clement's Church at Marrickville, Major, youngest son of the late Samuel Hope Bidwell of Dunkeld, Bathurst, to Ruby May, elder daughter of Charles M. Mulholland of Marrickville. Only 2 years after his marriage to Ruby, Major Bidwell was charged with bigamy. On the 27th of September 1911 in Melbourne, mad to marry the second time, young man charged with bigamy, he leaves the court sobbing. A bigamy charge heard in the City Court today presented pathetic features. A young man of respectable appearance named Major Bidwell was charged with having, whilst his first wife was alive in New South Wales, gone through the ceremony of marriage with another woman, a young widow in Victoria. Prior to the case being called on, Bidwell was interviewed by his first wife in the courtyard and a touching interchange of respectful greetings ensued. Ruby May Bidwell said she resided with her parents at Marrickville. The accused had been married to her on the 27th of January 1909 at St Clement's Church in Marrickville. She produced a copy of the marriage certificate. There was an infant daughter 20 months old. She last saw the accused in Sydney on the 21st of August when he left her to go to Melbourne on business. He'd often left her. Mr. Hogan asked, "Did your husband always treat you well?" The witness said yes, he always supported me, but not liberally. Jessica Maud Massey, trembling with emotion, said she was a widow and resided with her parents at Evelyn. On the 19th of April at the Christ Church in Brunswick, in 1904, she had married John Swift Massey, the second son of Mrs. Massey of Coburg and the late J.W. Massey, Esquire of Birmingham and Malden, to Jessica Maud, the second daughter of Stephen England, Esquire of Brunswick, and the granddaughter of the late Robert White England of Kingsbury in Somersetshire. They had a daughter, Kate Sarah Lillian Massey, in 1905 in Brunswick, Victoria, and John Massey died in April 1907. Detective Caution said he arrested the accused on the 19th of September. Bidwell admitted to both marriages and said, "I was mad to marry the second time." Mr. Hogan said his client pled guilty. He was committed for trial, and Bidwell left the court with his head in his arms and his shoulders shaking with sobs. Bail was allowed with the accused of £100 and two sureties of £100 each. He ended up being jailed for 2 years with hard labour on the 23rd of October 1911. On the 1st of November 1911, in the Western Star and Roman Advertiser newspaper in Queensland, it says, "Bigamist sentenced." In the criminal court in Melbourne on Thursday, Major Bidwell, 26 years old, who described himself as a traveller, said that he last lived in Parramatta and was charged with having in Sydney on the 27th of January 1909 married Miss Mulholland, and then in Melbourne on the 15th of July 1911 feloniously married a widow named Mrs. Massey. The prisoner pled guilty. The Chief Justice said that the prisoner was living with his wife for 6 weeks before he married Mrs. Massey. There was not the smallest reason to believe that he did not understand fully the enormity of the offence. It was said that he'd become infatuated with Mrs. Massey. In a British community, there was not a slightest extenuation for what the prisoner had done. Major Bidwell was freed by remission on the 22nd of April 1913. His description in the Victorian Police Gazette said that he was a native of New South Wales, a traveller who was born in 1885, 5 foot 9.5 inches, with a fresh complexion, brown hair and grey eyes, with a scar inside the right knee and a scar on his left thumb. Jessica, under her married name, Jessica Bidwell, arrived in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, as a 29-year-old on the 21st of October 1914 on the ship Niagara. Under the name of Mervyn Bidwell, on the same date, he said on his shipping record that he was 31, that he'd been born in 1883 in America, and that his residence place was New Zealand. He also departed to go to Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, on the same ship. Then, in 1914, under the name of Wolford Hope Bidwell, he enlisted in the military in the 10th Hussars, the Prince of Wales' own. On the 17th of October 1916, in the Sydney Sun, in the Supreme Court of New South Wales, Ruby May Bidwell, the petitioner, with Major Bidwell, the respondent. Major Bidwell, take notice that Ruby May Bidwell has commenced a suit against you in applying for the dissolution of her marriage on the grounds that you have, without cause or excuse, wilfully deserted her and have continuously deserted her during 3 years or upwards. Take notice you're required to enter an appearance in court on the 28th of February 1917. In the event you do not do so within the time, the petitioner will proceed and the suit will be heard and determined in your absence notwithstanding. So on the 5th of April 1917, the Sydney Morning Herald announced that Mr Young appeared for the petitioner Ruby May Bidwell, formerly Mulholland, who sought for a dissolution of her marriage with Major Bidwell on the grounds of desertion. They were married on the 27th of January 1909 at Marrickville in the Church of England, and His Honour granted the decree nisi. So he married Jessica again in Sacramento, California, USA in 1917, with Jessica stating that her maiden name was Jessica Maud England. In the 1917-1918 census, he's listed under Mervyn Wolford Bidwell. He listed his birth date as the 17th of June 1885, and he was living with his wife. In March 1920, Major left Bombay, India, bound for London. On the 21st of June 1920, in the Geelong Advertiser, it says Major Wolford Bidwell, a former Australian officer, has arrived at Vancouver en route to Siberia. His mission is to endeavour to salve cotton valued at £1 million, which was shipped in 1916 by Manchester firms to individual Russian subjects in Siberia. Under the name of Major Wolford Bidwell, and this time saying his birthplace is Australia, at the age of 35, he arrived in Vancouver, British Columbia, on the 11th of October 1920 on the Empress of Asia and listed himself as a merchant. On the 21st of April 1921 in the Sydney Sun, Bidwell and Bolshies, Anzacs Adventures with the Reds. In London on the 26th of February, Major Bidwell looks like a naval officer in a musical comedy. No real naval officer was ever so handsome. In fact, he is probably the only beauty man who has made us good in real life, as his class invariably does on the film. Major Reginald H. Bidwell, FRGS, a Dinkum Anzac and formerly a member of the New Zealand Expeditionary Forces, to give him his full title, has succeeded in crowding into 14 years, during which he has roamed the world, a mass of adventures on which Fairbanks might gaze enviously. Adventures which, far from terminating with the ceasefire of the armistice, only seem to be at their zenith. Major Bidwell is a native of Sydney and a brother of Reverend John Bidwell, rector of Rozelle. 14 years ago he left Australia and started on a tour of the world, in the course of which he played many parts and incidentally contrived to pick up a knowledge of the Russian language and of a couple of the principal dialects of China. Of late, these have stood him in good stead, and within a few days he leaves London once more by the Oviedo to face the possibility of further excitement in Siberia. When he has straightened out the few difficulties that exist there, he intends to return to Sydney and anticipates that the straightening process will be accomplished in time to enable him to do this by July. Siberia is an old friend of Major Bidwell. Major Bidwell knows European Russia as well as Siberia, and he knows the Russia of the Near East, the Russia around the Caspian, for he was until recently a member of the British mission, and his duties led him to spend some months in adjacent parts where murder is the staple industry and robbery is regarded as one of the great natural resources of the country. He has seen Trotsky addressing the comrades from his soapbox, which he used as his stepping stone of fame in the streets of Moscow, a fact which leads Major Bidwell to regard the Super Red with some respect. Lenin may be a high-souled idealist and Trotsky a plain crook, as a good many students of Russia hold, said Major Bidwell, but Trotsky, at any rate, has the courage of his ruffianism.
He's game to go out and face the people. Lennon hides in a fortified building and never ventures into the open without an armed guard. Major Bidwell's recent trips to Russia came about as a sequel to his fighting experiences. When the war broke out, he was in New Zealand with his wife. He enlisted immediately and, by reason of his previous experience with the Australian Light Horse, was granted a commission. With the rest, he went to Egypt and took part in the fighting there until a wound put him out of action for the duration and 6 months thereafter. Recuperating in London, his knowledge of Russian and Chinese, picked up during his earlier travels, led him to be appointed to the British mission to Russia, and he became associated with the ill-fated endeavour of Denikin to paint Russia a little less red. Friends in London did not know for months whether he was alive or dead, and then they suddenly heard from him. He turned up at Tehran and then in Georgia, and finally they made their minds up that he had either been executed by the Bolsheviks or killed by some of the anti-Bolshevik patriots who roamed this locality. Major Bidwell knew of the customs of the country and carried with him a minimum of negotiable property. Possibly it was just as well, for he encountered several bands of ardent constitutionalists who, finding that he had nothing worth taking, treated him well and related to the great work they were doing for civilization, proudly exhibiting some of the valuables they succeeded in restoring to their rightful owners, the supporters of the Constitution. Major Bidwell contrived to escape from enemies as well as friends. Several times he fell in with the Bolshevik hands, who were equally courteous and equally friendly, probably for the same reason, that he had in his possession nothing worth taking. From Georgia he returned to England just in time to find the British mission about to announce his death for the 5th time. He had a rest of a few weeks, and then he was called to headquarters and instructed to start to recover 4,000 bales of cotton worth £1 million, which had been stolen by the Bolsheviks and which were lying about somewhere in Siberia. These bales of cotton were the property of the De Jersey Manufacturing Company of Manchester and formed the balance of a large consignment sent to the Volokno factory in Russia in 1919. Owing to the revolution, the consignment had been held up, where it was later commandeered by General Rozanov as the property of the Soviet Republic. Rozanov didn't lose much time. He thought it best to let the cotton go while the going was good. He sold the greater part of it to the Japanese for 7 million yen and then handed in his portfolio. That is to say, he posted himself missing, and the Soviet Republic has not since heard anything of the 7 million yen. The 4,000 bales still unsold were traced by Bidwell up to the Amur River, where Semenov, the anti-Soviet leader, seized them on his occupation of the town. Semenov, not feeling too sure of his own future, removed the cotton to China, his headquarters, and there Bidwell followed it, somehow receiving him most courteously, but he demurred at surrendering the cotton. It was fair spoils of war captured from the Bolshevik control and therefore the property of the forces operating under Kolchak. In Russian he said, "I want my cotton, and if I don't get it to the British government, see that I do later on." Semenov smiled. "The matter is one for calm and deliberate discussion," he replied. The calm and deliberate discussion took the form of a banquet in which Bidwell met no fewer than 24 generals. The champagne flowed freely at the table, but Bidwell, of all the merry throng, declined to become sufficiently friendly to compromise. Eventually, Semenov declared that his love for Britain was so deep and abiding that he would never think of retaining for one day cotton which that country deemed essential to its welfare. If Major Bidwell wanted the cotton, he was welcome to it there and then. The next morning a squad of soldiers assisted to stow it in the trucks while Bidwell left in the same train, Semenov seeing him off, protesting undying friendship. Everything seemed plain sailing now, but when the train drew up at Manchuria, the place was found to be in the hands of Baron Ungern, a gentleman who sometimes professed to be a red of the deepest dye, and others to be white as the driven snow, according to the location of the loot within sight. For the present he was a sturdy upholder of the Soviet, and as his brigand followers searched the incoming trucks and discovered the cotton, he decided it must be requisitioned and it was essential to the welfare of the Republic. Bidwell, at the other end of the platform, learned of the change of government which had taken place while the train was in transit, and at once passed himself off as a penniless traveller trying to make his way to reach his home in Chicago. He made no claim for the cotton just then, and slid past the guards as soon as they would let him. He wasted no time in getting out of town and made his way to Harbin, where he sought the British consul, Harold Porter, with whom he laid his case. Porter was sympathetic and brought Bidwell in touch with General Jung, who was in command of 250 Chinese troops in the vicinity. Jung had suffered in various ways at the hands of Baron Ungern and his merry men, and although they vastly outnumbered him, he jumped at the chance of getting even. He accompanied Bidwell and issued an ultimatum to Ungern that unless the cotton was immediately surrendered, the whole forces of the Chinese Republic would be sent against him and his bandits. Ungern received the ultimatum with a grimace, indicating that he regarded things as only middling. He asked for time, and Jung replied that he had 1 minute to make up his mind. Ungern made one further short, sharp effort to bluff, then he climbed down, ordered his men to replace the cotton on the truck, and Bidwell sped off to Harbin with it. He sold the greater part of it to firms at Shanghai and returned to England, leaving the balance in safe storage, his mission accomplished. In the course of the chase for the cotton, Bidwell made some incidental investigations regarding General Romanov, the enterprising soldier who'd first stolen the British cotton and then stolen the 7 million yen, which he'd received for the stolen property. Following up the clues in Harbin and along the coast after he'd recovered the cotton, Bidwell found that the general had left Siberia and was on his way to settling down comfortably in a villa at Nice, which he'd owned in pre-war days. The Australians sent an urgent wire to the Colombo police, but the liner which carried the general was already clear of the harbour. Bidwell sent another wire to Suez, and when the liner pulled up there to enter the canal, a posse of brown policemen boarded the boat and induced the gallant soldier to break his journey. He was removed to Constantinople, where he was still on remand, charged with stealing the cotton. Although nominally a Soviet republic similar to that of European Russia, Siberia has abandoned the communistic principles which still hold the western side. Private enterprise is in full swing, just as it is in England and France. Siberia is promising, and in a little while it will be ready to take Australian wool and Australian agricultural implements just as it used to. Under the name of Wolford Bidwell, naming himself as British and married and 35, he put his birth date as 1887 and his birthplace as Bathurst in Australia. He departed Yokohama, Japan on the 13th of February 1922, bound for San Francisco, California. His end destination was London, England, and he said that he'd spent 1 month in America and his last residence was in England. In 1922, Mervyn Wolford and Jessica Bidwell were listed as living at Remuera in New Zealand in the region of Auckland. And in the Fielding Star on the 23rd of May 1922, it says, "Hidden hand. When the Bolsheviks made a trade agreement with Britain and agreed to cease their propaganda with India," remarked Mr. M. Wolford Bidwell, FRGS, who's just returned to Auckland from a visit to the East and Russia, when discussing the Far Eastern and Indian problems with a reporter. They've certainly stopped in Afghanistan but are continuing through Chinese Turkestan and Punjab. Mr. Bidwell was strongly of the opinion that the Gandhi has been financed by the Bolsheviks. He had no doubt of it. When he was in India a few months ago, there was the arrest of Gandhi, who was regarded as more or less supernatural and had a considerable effect on checking the insides of Bolshevik propaganda. And on the 13th of September 1922 in the Auckland Star, there was a prospectus for the Drury Terra Cotton Company Limited, with a capital of £50,000, dividended into 50,000 shares of £1 each. And the provisional directors listed number 2 on the list was Mervyn Wolford Bidwell, an accountant of Auckland. He also listed himself as a broker, M.W. Bidwell, Victoria Insurance Buildings of Auckland. And he was promoting terracotta blocks for the structural engineers and builders and for people to put in shares into this company. Under the name of Wolford Bidwell, at the age of 37, he said his nationality was English. He'd been born in Bathurst, Australia in 1886, and that his last residence was in London. And he arrived at Honolulu in Hawaii on the 19th of May 1923. He said his length of time in the US was 7 weeks and he didn't intend to be a citizen. He departed Honolulu on the 31st of October 1923. Under the name of Major Bidwell, at 37 years old, saying his birth year was 1887, he departed England on the 13th of March 1924, with his destination as Halifax in Canada. And in the census record, he's listed as Major Bidwell, living at the Grosvenor Hotel at Wimbledon in London, and 37 years old, and lists himself as a merchant. He stated that he was born in England in that census. Kate Sarah Maud Massey says that her nationality was English and she was born in Melbourne in 1906, At the age of 18, she departed Honolulu, Hawaii, and arrived in San Pedro, Wilmington, and LA, California on the 18th of October 1924. Her last residence was Hawaii, and said she was accompanied by a Dorkin car. Under the name of Wolford Bidwell, at the age of 44, saying that he was born in Bathurst, Australia in 1886. He arrived in Key West, Florida, USA from Havana, Cuba on the 28th of July 1930, and that he was staying there for 13 days. He said his usual residence was England. And Kate Massey was listed in the 1931 census in Victoria, and again in a shipping record at the age of 25, saying that she had departed Brisbane, Australia, and arrived in London in July 1931. Meanwhile, Jessica Maud Bidwell, his wife, is listed as living in London, and Mervyn Bidwell, in 1931, was living in Canada. Under the name of Wolford Bidwell, at the age of 46, it says that he's arriving in Buffalo, New York, on the 6th of July 1932. He stated on this shipping record he was born at Bathurst on the 17th of June 1886. In 1932, there was a warrant issued for the arrest of Mervyn Wolford Bidwell, alias MervynWollf Bidwell, alias Major W.M. Bidwell, from the Commissioner's Office in Brisbane, who is wanted on warrant at Toronto, Canada, charged in 1931 for obtaining from Edna Port of Toronto valuable securities by false pretences with the intent to defraud. His description: 46 years old but looks older, 5'11", 180 pounds in weight, medium build, dark brown hair turning grey, brownish grey eyes, a full face, clean shaven, a company promoter, believed to be a native of Australia, whereabouts required. Meanwhile, Kate Massey, who's 29 by this stage, departed England on the 5th of October 1934 with her destination as Montreal, Canada. On the 12th of October 1934, she's embarking from Liverpool and arrived in Quebec, Canada, with her final destination as Toronto. It states that her occupation is an art student and that the person in the old country is Mrs. Jessica M. Bidwell of 16 Camden Square, London, her mother. Under the name of Wolford Bidwell, stating he's 49 and born in 1887, departed Surabaya, Indonesia on the 17th of May 1936 and arrived in Southampton, England. On the 17th of July 1936 in the New Zealand Herald, deportation order, false pretences charge, stockbroker in trouble. In London on the 15th of July, Mervyn Wolford Bidwell, aged 49, stockbroker, who's believed to have been in New Zealand formerly, was recommended at the police court at Bow Street for deportation to Canada as a fugitive offender. He was charged with obtaining securities under false pretences in Canada. Bidwell said the prosecutrix had received more money than she'd invested, while he'd lost £8,000 in the hurricane and tidal wave that swept the British Honduras, which could only be described as an act of God. He claimed that the securities were entrusted to him for reinvestment. He'd had an interview with Mr. J.H. Thomas, former Secretary for the Colonies, regarding the development of British Honduras, and that the arrangements were proceeding when a hurricane and tidal wave wiped out his concessions. In the 1939 English census, he's listed as Mervyn Bidwell. He listed his birth date as the 17th of June 1886 and said he was living in Paddington, London, as a journalist, and interestingly, Jessica's not at the same address. On the 10th of March 1944, in the Edinburgh Gazette, Mervyn Wolford Bidwell, late of 135 Cholmondeley Gardens, Hampstead, London, company director, but whose present residence or place of business the petitioner is unable to ascertain. In 1947, under the name of MervynWollf Bidwell, he's living in Sussex, England. On the 19th of December 1950, in the Daily Herald, under the name of Major Bidwell, for 90 seconds last night, Major MervynWollf Bidwell was a free man. That was the time he took to leave the dock at the Glasgow High Court to walk into the street outside, and there the Scotland Yard detectives rearrested him and charged him with evading purchase tax. He will appear at Bow Street. Throughout yesterday's trial, the prosecution was fighting to beat the clock. Bidwell, a 64-year-old businessman, had been 110 days under arrest, and under a Scottish Act of 1887 he would have gone free if his trial had not ended by midnight. It ended at 6 p.m. after the prosecution had dropped 9 of the charges of fraud, and the judge had directed the jury to return a verdict of not guilty on the remaining 5 because of insufficient evidence. Bidwell's trial was repeatedly held up. 7 witnesses sent medical certificates that they were ill, and 30 prosecution witnesses were dispensed with by the Crown. A woman witness became ill during her evidence last week, and there were only 14 members of the jury when the court resumed yesterday, with one having collapsed during the weekend. Scottish law prohibits a man being kept in custody for more than 110 days without conviction. Under the name of Mervyn Bidwell, on the 8th of May 1957, he's living in Wales at Cardiff. In September 1970, he married Henny Lottie Noy in Kensington, London, before Jessica died, so his second case of a bigamous marriage. Jessie Bidwell passed away at Terre Haute in Indiana, USA, on the 28th of February 1971. And it says Jessie M. Bidwell, 76, was pronounced dead at the Mary Sherman Hospital on Friday. Major Wolford Bidwell, that was the name that he died under, died at the age of 94 in October 1980, and his death record states his birth date was the 17th of June 1886. His daughter Marjorie Lillian Bidwell was born on the 17th of January 1910 in Parramatta, New South Wales. She married Frederick Reginald Fryer on the 21st of December 1935 at St Stephen's in Willoughby, New South Wales. Frederick was the youngest son of Mr and Mrs F.R. Fryer of Dulwich Hill, and Marjorie Lillian was listed as the only daughter of Mrs R.M. Bidwell of Chatswood. Frederick had been born on the 18th of March 1910 in Queensland. They lived in Taree, New South Wales, where Frederick was a salesman, and then moved to Camden, New South Wales. Frederick died in 1999 at the age of 89, and Marjorie died on the 19th of October 2012 in Camden, New South Wales, at the age of 102. They had no children. And a little on Major Bidwell's siblings. A brother, Samuel George Bidwell, was born on the 9th of February 1869 in Emerald Hill, Victoria. He is listed as a teacher of a provisional school at Coodaghan, and then on the 9th of June 1890 he was at Hollybrook, New South Wales, teaching, and then on the 22nd of August 1895 at Mount Rankin. He married Eleanor Smee on the 5th of October 1896 at Newtown, New South Wales, and in 1932 they were living at Bankstown. Samuel died on the 15th of April 1960 in Ashfield, New South Wales, aged 91. They had no children. A sister, Agnes Eliza Wolford Bidwell, was born in 1871 in Eaglehawk, Victoria. She married Christopher Harrison at Bathurst, New South Wales in 1893, and they had 5 children. By 1930, they were living at Lismore, New South Wales, where Christopher was a poultry farmer, and Agnes died in Nowra, New South Wales in 1946 at the age of 75. Another sister, Harriet Catherine Wolford Bidwell, known as Cynthia, was born on the 22nd of August 1872 at Emerald Hill in Victoria. She married Hugh Leslie Smith Lamont on the 19th of May 1890 in Bathurst, New South Wales. They had 6 children and lived at Wellington, Molong and West Wyalong. In 1896, Hugh Leslie Smith Lamont was declared bankrupt, and Harriet died on the 25th of September 1915 at Sir Edwin's Hospital at McMahon's Point in New South Wales, aged only 43, and when her youngest child was only 4. Another sister, Mary Teresa Wolford Bidwell, was born in Emerald Hill, Victoria. She married Samson Barnett Windsor, a tailor in Bathurst, New South Wales, in 1899 in a double wedding with her sister Clara. And it stated that they married at St Stephen's Church on December the 26th, 1898 in Bathurst, that Samson Bernard Windsor was the second son of Thomas Windsor of Kiama, and Mary Teresa was the third daughter of the late Samuel Bidwell of Dunkeld, Bathurst. They had 5 children together and lived in Nowra. By 1913, they were living in Sydney, where Samson was working as an iron machinist. And Mary died on the 12th of November 1966 in Eastwood, New South Wales, aged 92. Anne Clara Frances Wolford Bidwell, known as Clara, was born on the 2nd of September 1876 at Brawongle near Bathurst, New South Wales. She married William Burton, who was from Millthorpe, in the double wedding just mentioned. They had 8 children together, and they also lived in Deniliquin, Orange and Forest Reefs. And Clara died on the 6th of June 1949 at Millthorpe, New South Wales. Her husband's death notice was in the paper on the 11th of October 1954 in the Orange Central Western Daily. The death occurred early yesterday morning of Mr. William Burton Sr. at Begala, Sydney, at the residence of his son William. The late Mr. Burton was born at Dunkeld and spent most of his life there at Forest Reefs and Millthorpe. He was predeceased by his wife 5 years ago. 2 sons died in World War II, Eric in HMAS Perth and Ronald in the Air Force. There are 15 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren. Another sibling, James Cornelius Wolford Bidwell, was born in 1878 in Bathurst, and he married Phyllis Elizabeth Hogland in Parramatta, New South Wales on the 2nd of June 1902. They had a stillborn daughter in 1905. He was a traveller and hawker, and he received his hawker's licence on the 21st of February 1920, and that was featured in the Maitland Mercury. Phyllis died in May 1936, and he then married Amy Beatrice Lawrence in Wollongong in 1944, and James died on the 6th of June 1958 in Wollongong at the age of 80. A sister, Evangeline Margaret, was born in 1880 in Bathurst, New South Wales, but died at the age of 3 in West Macquarie. Another brother, John Charles Bidwell, was born on the 1st of March 1884 in Dunkeld in West Macquarie, New South Wales. He married Emily Olive May Packham on the 7th of March 1914 at Petersham, New South Wales, and they had a daughter, Gwyneth, in June 1916. John became a reverend, and on the 19th of September 1922 in the Muswellbrook Chronicle it says that Reverend Mr. Bidwell, rector of St. Stephen's at Newtown, is on a visit to Muswellbrook and is the guest of his brother, Mr. G. Bidwell, the headmaster of the Superior Public School. The Reverend Gentleman's parish is one of the largest in Sydney, and the strenuous work has affected his health, necessitating a rest. On the 20th of December 1930 in the Sydney Morning Herald, Reverend John Bidwell. The Reverend John Bidwell, rector of St. Stephen's in Newtown for the past 9 years, was recently inducted to the incumbency of St. Paul's in Sydney. Mr. Bidwell passed through Moore Theological College in 1908 and secured the Oxford and Cambridge Preliminary Certificate. He gained a Licentiate of Theology, University of Durham in 1910 and took his BA degree at Sydney University in 1919. He was ordained a deacon in 1908 and a priest the following year, both ordinations taking place at St Andrew's Cathedral. His first appointment from 1909 to 1912 was as curate of St Paul's in Sydney, the parish of which he is now rector. The following year he was curate of the All Souls of Leichhardt. From 1913 to 1915 he was rector at St Stephen's in Lidcombe and supernumerary chaplain to the Church of England Cemetery at Rookwood. For the next 4 years he was the minister in the Mission District of St George's in Glenmore Road, and in 1918 acted as locum tenens of St Stephen's in Newtown. The next 2 years he was rector of St Thomas's in Balmain West and became rector of St Stephen's Newtown in 1921, which included the chaplaincies of Camperdown Cemetery, Royal Prince Alfred Hospital, Royal Alexandra Hospital for Children and the South Sydney Women's Hospital. And Reverend John Charles Bidwell passed away on the 6th of June 1974 at Eversley Hospital, New South Wales, at the age of 90. So it certainly seems that Major Bidwell was a bit of a black sheep of the family. It seems that every other child in the family went on to lead respectable lives, and no less, he had a brother that was a well-revered reverend.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.